Hi, I'm Justin Baird. I'm president of Blueprint 1543. I'm a former university professor and psychological scientist. And today I want to address the question of how many senses are there? Are there just five senses? And so what and who cares? Seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and touching. Unless you're Spider-Man. Then of course you've got Spidey sense as well. But the question that I want to wrestle with a little bit with you is that right? And does it really matter? One way in which you might imagine that it matters is it's also a common idea in the cognitive sciences and other psychological sciences that part of human intelligence comes from our ability to receive information about the world around us, to integrate that information into percepts, into concepts, into ideas, into objects, into representations that help us know what's out there around us and to start making sense and meaning of that. That's the root of intelligence. Intelligent systems perceive what is out there in the real world around them and integrate that in important ways. Strong perceptual systems and then cognitive systems that do that kind of work is where we get our intelligence. And so when babies are sort of growing in intelligence from in the womb until out of the womb, or as we continue to grow intelligence throughout our lives, a big part of that is how we are bringing in sensory information. On the tail end of development, we see that aging and a decline in our ability to think, reason, and remember is often predicted by, or at least correlates with, the decline in our sensory information, especially maybe hearing. That those who start to lose their sense of hearing are at higher risk for dementia and social isolation. So that sensory information seems to be really important. It follows from these kinds of observations that the artificial intelligence systems that we should be most afraid of are not the ChatGPT text-based kinds of artificial intelligence, but the artificial intelligence that has perceptual systems out there, that have sensors, that are detecting auditory information, that are detecting visual wavelengths and other kinds of light information, and then manage to incorporate that. That is much trickier technology and has been harder to come by, and maybe why we haven't seen the machines take over just yet. But all of these are reasons why understanding our senses and activating our senses throughout our lives is really important. So then we might ask, well then, what are these senses? How many of them are there? So there's that practical developmental kind of reason for wondering the question. Yeah, but there are also what you might think of as other, not quite as immediate reasons for being interested, but maybe, for instance, what if you're interested in developing immersive, not just 3D or 4D, but, I don't know, 7D or however many Ds we need kinds of experiences for people. You know that a good vacation means activating all of these different senses for somebody in a resort-like location or in an entertainment kind of setting. Well, what are those different senses that you need to engage? Or some people in worship communities want to help facilitate worship experiences and spiritual experiences in which we're incorporating as many of our senses as possible so that we are engaging the divine. We're loving God with all of our different senses, or we're experiencing God's creation through all of our different senses. Well, what are all of those different senses then? And that takes us back to, are there just five? Well, that idea of five, if we look at it carefully, starts looking pretty arbitrary. Apparently, it's been with us at least since Aristotle. He made famous the five senses, the big five that we talk about. But it turns out that philosophers and scientists who really look at how many senses we have would say, that starts looking pretty arbitrary that there are just these five. Depending on how you want to carve it up, they're either more or fewer. Most people go to the side of more, and that may be surprising, but let me give you a few examples that are really easy to sort of think about. If you think for a second about the different kinds of things that you perceive, the different states, bright light is vision, right? A loud noise is what you hear. A strong smell is through your nose, it's through your sense of smell, and so forth. Well, what about things like strong hunger, strong thirst? Aren't you perceiving something in those situations? You might say, well, yeah, that's not coming from the outside, that's in the inside, but it's perception nonetheless. What about pain? Pain isn't the same as pressure, and I can get pain on the inside or from the outside. So it's not clear that the inside-outside kind of distinction is very helpful here. What about this one? What if you close your eyes and imagine where your left foot is? Can you sort of perceive where your left foot is in space? And if your eyes are closed and you keep moving it around, or maybe your left hand, or whatever your body part, Can you move that in space and know where it is? Can you pass? I missed. Can I touch it to my nose? Can I touch it to my eye without looking? I can do that or fail to do that because of another sensory system that's called our propriosensory system. Proprioception is the fancy word for it. So where's my body in space? What about when you stand up real fast and you feel dizzy, or you spin yourself around and you need to reorient? That's due to the action of little tubes in our ears that help us to orient and balance ourselves. That's our vestibular system. That's another perceptual system, arguably. I mentioned touch. I mentioned pain. Well, what about pressure, cold, or temperature? There are all of these different ways of carving up our perceptual systems that make the whole, well, they're just five, seem pretty suspect. Some people even want to argue that, well, look, we know that there are lots of different forms of taste, right? Taste famously breaks down into at least sour, sweet, salty, bitter, and more recently umami, which is sort of a meaty or savory kind of taste sensation. And chefs are very interested in activating all five of those or balancing them in the right way to make food sort of multidimensional and rich experience, because it's activating all of these different kinds of taste, let alone the smell sensations that are mixed with the taste to produce our experience when we're eating. Well, does that mean we've got 5 different taste senses? What about the thousands of different chemicals that our noses can detect? Does that mean we have 1,000 different smell senses? So you can see that depending on how you want to carve up our sensory systems, it either gets way out of control, that we've got way too many, or if you want to just say it's the stuff that comes in through, I don't know, our skin, well, then we've got too few. There are different ways of carving up senses that make it either a whole bunch or too little, and none of them easily arrive at 5 and just 5 senses. So probably not 5 senses. And really the answer of how many senses do we have is an open question. Nobody really has a good agreement. So we need to go back to pragmatic considerations. Why are you asking the question? What problem are you trying to solve? And for this, let me just offer sort of a suggestion that I hope is helpful. If you are, say, a parent, or you're a person getting older, which is all of us, by the way, you might be interested in keeping your senses sort of active and engaged in the world around you. Let me suggest that 9 is not a bad number of sensory systems to pay attention to. That's right, 9. Not the 5, but 9. But we'll start with some of the 5s. Smelling, tasting, seeing, and hearing. 4 of the big 5 that people commonly talk about. Let's keep those active and engaged as much as possible. Some of that means experiencing a full range of input along those 4, lots of different taste sensations, lots of different smells, lots of different kinds of visual information, both in terms of their intensity, how bright, I mean, without blinding yourself, don't look into the sun, that's always bad. Or those welder things, you got to wear a welding mask if you're welding, because you burn your eye on that stuff. Just don't look. But visual intensity, colors, the full range of colors, complexity of visual information is important, as well as the auditory complexity, different ranges of tones. And let me note real quick that with visual and auditory information, you get richer, more complex information from natural environments than you do from artificial ones. We often think that, oh, we're getting these such brilliant kinds of visual information from, say, our new computer screens and television and things like that. But actually, almost every artificial environment has reduced the amount of visual or auditory information that is out there. A walk in nature gives you more complexity than a walk in the city. So that's something to keep in mind if you're trying to stimulate your visual system or your auditory system in the full range of modalities, the full range of dimensions that are important to those systems. A good walk in nature will do that job really well, because the intensity of some of our artificial environments wipes out a lot of that diversity. So those are those big 4. Touch, let's divide that one up into at least 3. Pain, pressure, and temperature. And again, there's something important about feeling those different ranges of temperature, of pressure, knowing what that feels like. Physical touch is a really important thing for our psychology to develop properly. Of course, we mean mostly of the positive sort, good hugs and things like that. But experiencing pain is important too. I don't think it's an accident that it seems like kids all over the place go through these periods of playing these different mercy or uncle games with each other where they try to inflict pain on each other and see who gives up first the game. I know when I was a kid, we'd grab each other's hands, we'd interlace our fingers and then try to, inflict pain on the hands of each other and see who would give up first. And partly, I think this tunes up our pain system to realize, well, what's acceptable levels of pain? What can I tolerate and what can't I? What's pain that leads to damage and what's pain that doesn't lead to damage? Because then that helps us not be quite so afraid of engaging certain kinds of uncomfortable activities in the world. Pain is part of life. We need to know how to manage it and not freak out or be afraid of it all the time. And those games help tune that up in a relatively safe way. Sometimes they get out of hand, but usually parents are there to say, hey, knock it off, don't hurt your sister, that kind of thing. So experiencing pain, that's an important part of filling out all of those different kinds of touch. And then there are these two more systems that help us navigate the world, engage our systems, interact with the stuff around us so that we can keep getting information in about the world around us. And that's that vestibular system, that's our balance system, and our propriosensory system, or proprioception. Those, again, the vestibular helps with our balance and orientation in space, whereas proprioception refers to where is our body in space, and where's our body in relation to the other parts of our body. And those get really well developed in a lot of sporting activities. Playing catch helps with those, especially when you're moving. Dance is great, tumbling, gymnastics, all kinds of outdoor sorts of play. Wrestling is really good for these. I don't think it's an accident that little kids like to wrestle when they're small and they sort of enjoy wrestling with their parents. It's part of developing these perceptual systems so that they mature right, so that they really do know how to control their bodies in space and know where their different parts are so that they can keep them out of danger or can solve certain kinds of problems. I'm suggesting it's helpful, I think, developmentally to talk about 9 different sensory systems. That's your vision, your hearing, your smell, your taste, pain, pressure, temperature, vestibular or balance, and then proprioception, or where's my body in space. So those 9 seem to be really important kinds of sensory systems, perceptual systems to develop, to nurture throughout your life so that you have nice, rich kinds of experiences with the world around you and help develop then thought and just enjoy life better. So instead of talking about 5 senses, maybe let's talk about at least 9, with the caveat that it really depends on how you want to carve up this pie. I'm Justin Barrett, and I appreciate you joining me today. Like, subscribe, and if you have other kinds of questions or topics you'd like to hear me talk about, let us know. Thanks, and enjoy your senses.